So just picture this. Um, Imagine a beloved king, like the absolute pinnacle of his nation's history, right?
Hmm.
And he's stripped of all his royal dignity. He is literally scratching at a set of heavy wooden doors and deliberately letting saliva run down into his own beard.
Yeah, all just to escape execution.
Exactly. It's wild. So today, we are unpacking what is probably the most desperate, unpolished survival story of history's greatest king. I'm your host, and, well, before we dive into the intense reality of chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, I just want to pause for a second.
Right.
I want to offer a really heartfelt divine blessing for your day and for your entire week ahead. May you find peace, clarity, and, unexpected moments of grace in whatever challenges you're facing right now.
That is a beautiful thought.
Thanks. Because, I mean, if today's story teaches us anything, it's that we all need grace when our backs are truly against the wall.
We really do.
Yeah.
And that sentiment perfectly sets the stage for the raw humanity we're going to explore in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're using the historical and theological notes from the Holman and NWA study Bibles, and they really help analyze this moment where the polished veneer of a historical hero just completely shatters.
It shatters completely. Like, the contrast is honestly jarring because when we think of David, the default image is what? The confident shepherd boy swinging a sling at a giant?
Right, or the golden monarch presiding over this era of prosperity.
Exactly. But
Right.
this specific chapter, it reads like a high-stakes political thriller where the protagonist is he's making terrible, panicked decisions.
Yeah, he is a desperate refugee here,
Right.
fleeing the wrath of King Saul. And he is entirely out of options.
Right. We're looking at a fugitive on the run, a totally fabricated cover story, a stolen relic, and a deeply, deeply humiliating performance of sheer insanity.
The stakes here represent a massive shift in his narrative. The text is basically forcing us to confront how blinding fear, like sheer terror, can drive even the most faith-filled people to extreme, irrational measures.
Yeah, because he's essentially watching his entire life collapse in real time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And his immediate reaction isn't some quiet prayer for deliverance. It's a frantic scramble for self-preservation.
And that scramble takes him straight to a place called Nob. According to the study notes, Nob is a priestly city, and it's practically functioning as the central sanctuary of Israel at this time.
Mhm.
But the geography is what really stands out to me here. Nob is situated, just about 3 kilometers south of Gibeah.
Which is Saul's home base.
Right. Gibeah is King Saul's royal headquarters. So David is running for his life, but he hasn't fled to the wilderness yet. He's hiding in plain sight, literally in the shadow of the regime that wants to execute him.
And that proximity to Gibeah tells us just how limited his tactical options were. I mean, he couldn't risk a long journey without supplies.
No, he'd be caught immediately.
Right. So he makes this highly calculated, incredibly risky stop at the local sanctuary. But when he arrives, the priest, a man named Ahimelech, comes out to meet him. And the original Hebrew text specifically notes that Ahimelech is trembling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the priest's survival instincts are kicking in just as much as David's.
Well, sure, because David's arrival is a massive red flag.
Yeah.
Ahimelech knows the political climate. He knows Saul's volatile temperament. And suddenly, the king's son-in-law, who is a high-ranking military commander, just shows up at his door completely alone.
Which just didn't happen. Men of David's stature simply do not travel without an armed entourage.
Exactly. So Ahimelech immediately suspects he is being pulled into something really dangerous.
Yeah, Ahimelech is trying to read the political winds here. Because if he helps a known enemy of the state, he's committing treason.
But if he turns away the king's commander...
He might face immediate retaliation. He's caught in an impossible bind, so he looks to David for an explanation.
And this is where the narrative just totally shatters that sanitized Sunday school image of David. He looks this terrified priest in the eye, and he blatantly lies to him.
Just flat out lies.
Yeah. David claims that King Saul has personally dispatched him on a highly classified, covert mission. He insists the matter is so secret he can't discuss it, and he fabricates this whole story about having a specialized unit of soldiers waiting for him at some undisclosed rendezvous point.
It's a masterclass in deception, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
And it is entirely fictional. He's leveraging his military authority to intimidate the priest and completely fabricate a cover story just to secure what he needs.
I mean, it's as absurd as a modern government contractor showing up unannounced at, a regional security checkpoint,
Right.
looking completely disheveled, flashing a badge and demanding the guards bypass all security protocols because he's on some black ops mission. directly from the executive branch. The audacity is just staggering.
It really is.
But, this brings up a profound question about the source material. Why would a sacred text written to preserve the legacy of its greatest earthly king, right?
Yeah.
Why openly record him manipulating and lying to a holy priest? Most ancient historical texts functioned as state propaganda, designed to make their leaders look infallible.
Well, the decision to include this highlights a really unique characteristic of this particular ancient literature. It refuses to sanitize human flaws.
Wow.
Yeah, the text is brutally honest about the fact that David is not acting out of integrity here. He is operating purely out of panic. And the Holman notes point out a deeply tragic irony in his decision to lie.
What's the irony?
Well, David might have internally justified this deception as a way of providing Ahimelech with plausible deniability.
Oh, meaning if the priest genuinely believes David is on official business, he can't be accused of harboring a known fugitive later on.
Precisely. If Ahimelech doesn't know the truth, David assumes the priest is legally protected.
Right.
But this very lie, this elaborate cover story, is the exact mechanism that sets up a catastrophic slaughter in the following chapter. Because David lied, Ahimelech provides aid in good faith. But when King Saul inevitably discovers this, he doesn't view Ahimelech as some duped innocent.
No, Saul's too paranoid for that.
Exactly. Saul views the priest's aid as definitive proof of a widespread conspiracy against the crown. So the lie meant to shield the priest is the very thing that condemns him and his entire city.
That is a devastating ripple effect. And, the need to maintain that very lie is what forces the next major crisis in the sanctuary, because David has claimed to be commanding an invisible army, right?
Right, he has to play the part.
Yeah, he needs to secure enough provisions to make the story believable. So he asks Ahimelech for 5 loaves of bread. But Ahimelech says he doesn't have any common bread. All he has is the bread of the presence.
Right, and the bread of the presence, or the sacred bread, is a critical element of the tabernacle's function. The study Bibles provide fascinating context here.
What kind of context?
Well, there were 12 loaves, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and they were placed on a golden table before the presence of God. This wasn't just food, it was a physical symbol of the ongoing covenant between the deity and the nation.
And there were really strict regulations around it, right? The notes mention these loaves were swapped out for fresh, hot bread every single Sabbath. But the old loaves weren't just tossed aside. They were legally and ceremonially reserved exclusively for the priests to consume, and only within the holy precinct. No civilian was ever permitted to eat them.
Never. It was a rigid ceremonial boundary designed to maintain the absolute sanctity of the tabernacle. But Ahimelech, looking at this supposedly starving military commander on a secret mission, offers an unprecedented compromise.
Yeah.
He agrees to give David the sacred bread, but he stipulates a condition of ceremonial purity. He asks if the men have abstained from sexual relations with women.
Which forces David to just pile another lie onto the first one. He assures the priest that his phantom soldiers are ceremonially clean because they're on an active military campaign, which in ancient times did require a state of ritual purity.
Right.
So Ahimelech hands over the sacred bread. But if we pull back and look at the mechanics of this, it is staggering.
Oh, totally.
If you picture a starving man walking into a grand cathedral today, and the only food he can find to survive is the consecrated communion wafers, that is the level of taboo we are looking at here.
It's a massive deal.
Right. The ancient texts usually depict swift, fatal divine punishment for anyone unauthorized touching or consuming holy items. I am genuinely surprised Ahimelech isn't struck down on the spot for handing over the covenant symbol.
And that tension is exactly what the original readers would have felt. It appears to be a flagrant violation of Levitical law.
Yeah.
But the theological notes reveal that this specific moment establishes a profound precedent about the architecture of divine justice. Yeah. Centuries later, Jesus of Nazareth deliberately references this exact incident to dismantle the arguments of rigid religious leaders in his own era.
Oh, wow, that adds a whole new layer. How does Jesus justify Ahimelech breaking such a strict death penalty level law?
Well, Jesus points to Ahimelech's decision to demonstrate that the original intent of the law was always to foster and preserve human life.
Okay, that makes sense.
Ahimelech was forced to choose between adhering to a mechanical, symbolic regulation about who gets to eat a piece of bread and the immediate physical preservation of a starving human being standing right in front of him.
So he chose mercy.
Exactly. Ahimelech rightly deduced that human need and mercy supersede strict ceremonial compliance. And Jesus validates that choice in Mark chapter 2, teaching that the spirit of the law always overrides the rigid letter of the law when human life is on the line.
Wow. So within this messy narrative of David's deception, Ahimelech's split-second decision actually becomes the historical gold standard for righteous mercy.
It really does.
It proves that divine justice isn't just some blind algorithm, It considers the context of human suffering.
Absolutely.
But David might have convinced the priests to bend the rules, but his elaborate cover story had a really fatal flaw. Because he wasn't the only one in the room listening to this exchange.
No, he wasn't. The text introduces one of the most ominous bystanders in all of historical literature.
Yeah.
Doeg the Edomite.
The narrative suddenly just pans over to reveal Doeg standing in the background of the sanctuary, and he's identified as King Saul's chief herdsman. So he's essentially a high-ranking official, loyal to the very man trying to kill David, and the text just chillingly notes he was detained before the Lord.
Right, and that phrase, detained before the Lord, is debated by scholars.
What do they think it means?
Well, the study notes suggest a few primary theories. Doeg may have been fulfilling a specific religious vow or offering a mandatory sacrifice. Or perhaps he was undergoing a period of ceremonial purification or penance, which would have confined him to the sanctuary precinct.
Right.
But regardless of the religious mechanism keeping him there, his presence is just a geopolitical disaster for David.
It's the absolute worst-case scenario. I mean, a fiercely loyal servant of the king is quietly watching the kingdom's most wanted fugitives illegally acquire sacred provisions.
Yeah.
And David instantly realizes he is completely exposed because a fugitive without a weapon is a sitting duck, especially with a royal informant standing like 10 feet away.
Exactly.
So abandoning the measured tone of his cover story, David urgently asks Ahimelech for a spear or a sword. He tries to justify it by claiming the king's mission was so sudden he didn't have time to pack his weapons, but the panic is clearly bleeding through.
Oh, yeah. He is entirely defenseless, and he knows Doeg will report this the moment he leaves the sanctuary.
And Ahimelech's response is where the story shifts from, like, a political thriller to almost cinematic irony.
Yeah.
The priest says, "The only weapon we have here is the sword of Goliath, the Philistine giant you killed in the valley of Elah. It's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod." And David immediately responds, "There is none like it. Give it to me." But the mechanics of this are wild to me.
How so?
It's like a disgraced heavyweight boxer on the run from a cartel having to smash the glass at a local sports museum to steal back his own championship belt just to defend himself in an alleyway fight.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Why on earth is a massive blood-stained Philistine sword sitting in the holiest sanctuary in Israel?
Well, it functioned as a votive offering.
Okay.
In the ancient Near East, it was standard practice to dedicate the spoils of a major, seemingly impossible victory to the deity who was believed to have granted that victory.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so years earlier, after defeating Goliath, David likely brought the giant sword to the tabernacle to publicly acknowledge that the victory belonged to God and not to his own military prowess.
So it was a permanent physical symbol of divine deliverance.
Exactly.
But its physical location in the room is fascinating. Ahimelech says it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. And the ephod wasn't just a piece of clothing, right?
No, it wasn't.
It was the specific priestly garment that contained the Urim and Thummim, the tools used to divine God's will and ask for divine guidance.
And that physical detail carries massive thematic weight.
Really? How so?
Well, David is standing right in front of the ephod, the instrument of divine counsel. But instead of asking the priest to use the ephod to ask God what he should do next, David reaches behind it and grabs the sword of his past victory.
Oh, wow.
He is literally bypassing divine guidance to rely on a physical weapon.
Which perfectly illustrates his sheer panic. I mean, he's stripped of his royal status, he's terrified of the silent informant watching his every move, and he is clinging to the relic of his greatest triumph just to survive the afternoon.
Right.
And armed with Goliath's sword, knowing his cover is completely blown by Doeg, David makes a strategic decision that borders on the incomprehensible.
Yeah, he does.
He runs straight into enemy territory.
It is a profound miscalculation. He flees the borders of Israel and seeks asylum in Gath, appealing directly to King Achish.
But Gath isn't just any neighboring city-state. It is one of the 5 major strongholds of the Philistine Pentapolis. And more importantly, Gath is Goliath's hometown.
Yeah.
David has just walked into the hometown of the giant he decapitated while carrying that very giant sword.
It just shows the absolute deterioration of his logic. Fear has completely compromised his strategic thinking.
Right.
He likely operated on the desperate political axiom that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He hoped that because Saul was hunting him, the Philistines might view him as a useful defector, or maybe an anonymous mercenary they could employ against Israel.
But anonymity is impossible when you're the most famous warrior in the region.
Exactly.
I mean, the moment he enters the city, the servants of King Achish instantly recognize him. And they don't just point him out, they actually quote the viral pop song that the Israelite women used to sing about him.
Yeah, they had to hurt.
They say to the king, "Isn't this the guy they sing about in the dances?" Saul struck down his thousands, but David his tens of thousands.
Just imagine attempting to lay low as a political defector in a hostile capital, only to have the local government quote the exact propaganda anthems written about how many of their own citizens you have slaughtered.
Unbelievable.
His identity is undeniable.
A jig is completely up. The Philistines know they have Israel's greatest military asset in their grasp, and David realizes he has walked voluntarily into a fatal trap. He is surrounded, and his reaction to this realization is perhaps the most shocking moment in the entire narrative.
It really is.
He decides to fake madness. He starts scratching violently at the city doors, making marks on the gates, and he deliberately lets his saliva run down into his beard.
Yeah.
But, okay, I have to push back on the logistics of this disguise. Why would drooling save his life? Wouldn't a Philistine king look at the man who killed their champion, decide he's lost his mind, and simply execute him anyway to tie up a loose end?
To modern sensibilities, sure, executing a mad enemy makes pragmatic sense.
Right.
But the study notes dive deep into the cultural and theological context of the ancient Near East, which completely flips our understanding of this scene.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, we have to address the beard. In that specific societal framework, a man's beard was the ultimate symbol of his honor, his masculine dignity, and his sanity.
Interesting.
So to purposely defile your own beard to allow saliva to cool and run through it was an act of unimaginable, grotesque shame.
So the very act of degrading himself to that level was irrefutable proof to the Philistines that his cognitive functions were entirely broken.
Exactly.
Because no sane person would voluntarily endure that kind of social suicide.
Exactly. But the second layer is the ancient theological view of mental illness. Madness wasn't viewed as a neurological condition back then. It was viewed as a direct, active torment by the gods.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, ancient people believed that madmen were under a severe divine curse.
Meaning they were essentially untouchable.
Precisely. The prevailing belief was that if you interacted with a madman, or worse, if you harmed someone currently being punished by the divine realm, you could accidentally invite that same curse or divine wrath onto yourself.
Ah, I see.
So you left madmen strictly alone. They were basically a spiritual contagion.
Wow.
So when David starts clawing at the wood and drooling, it's not merely a physical disguise. It functions as a cultural and spiritual repellent.
That is absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's incredibly undignified, but strategically brilliant. And King Tish's reaction proves it worked perfectly.
It really does.
Achish looks at David, turns to his servants, and responds with heavy, irritated sarcasm. He essentially says, "Do I lack madmen in my own kingdom that you bring this lunatic into my presence? Get him out of my house."
Yet Gishish dismisses David not as a high-value military threat, but as a spiritual nuisance. And that sarcastic dismissal is the exact window David needs to slip away and escape with his life.
Incredible. So when we step back and synthesize this entire journey from the trembling priest at Nob to the drooling fugitive in the gates of Gath, what is the overarching takeaway from the source material here?
Well, the primary takeaway is a profound, necessary deconstruction of how we view historical and spiritual icons. There is a deep human tendency to want our heroes to be untouchable, right?
Yeah.
We want always brave, always operating with perfect integrity, always relying flawlessly on their faith. But this text refuses to give us a sanitized myth.
Yeah.
David experienced overwhelming, paralyzing panic. He resorted to massive destructive deception. He made terrible, near-fatal strategic choices.
He really did.
Ultimately, he didn't survive because of his brilliance. He survived because of a priest's radical, rule-breaking mercy and his own sheer, undignified grit.
It really grounds the narrative in reality, doesn't it?
It does.
It forces us to acknowledge that greatness is not defined by the absence of fear, and it certainly isn't defined by an absence of messy, complicated mistakes.
The human condition remains fragile. even for the people history remembers as giants.
So true. Which leaves us with a provocative final thought to mull over today, something for you listening to really explore on your own.
Yeah.
Consider the stark contrast we just analyzed. On one hand, you have David, the confident giant slayer, armed with unwavering faith in the Valley of Elah. On the other hand, you have David, the terrified fugitive, clutching a stolen sword and scratching at enemy gates.
Quite the juxtaposition.
It is. So, how often do our own past victories completely fail to shield us from our present anxieties?
Hmm.
When the fear sets in, the past often feels very far away. What lengths would you go to when your back is truly against the wall and the only way forward requires you to let go of your carefully curated dignity?
It's a deeply unsettling question about the extreme edges of human survival.
It truly is. Well, that wraps up our exploration of the sources for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As we close out our time together, I want to say goodbye by reminding you that God blesses all the listeners. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.